Western leaders have criticized Donald Trump for saying he would not protect NATO allies who are not spending enough on defense from Russian attacks. The Republican frontrunner Trump said he had previously told NATO states he would encourage Russia to do whatever they want if they didn't fulfill their commitments to the bloc. Trump has regularly lashed out at members of the alliance for failing to spend at least 2% of their economic output on defense. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says any suggestion that allies would not defend each other undermines Western security. Meanwhile, NATO has started its biggest military exercises in decades in Europe. More than 3 months of naval, air and ground maneuvers are kicking off. Operation Steadfast Defender will take place across much of Europe. 90,000 personnel from all 31 NATO member countries as well as Sweden will take part. It's the largest operation on the continent since the Cold War. The exercises are designed to test the readiness of the alliance's eastern border. Let's take a look at what's in store and how Russia is reacting to NATO's show of force.
Planes, warships, tanks. It's been 3 years since the last Operation Steadfast Defender. This year's version is happening on a grand scale, meant to demonstrate how fast forces can move from North America to Europe and activate defenses there against a near-peer enemy. NATO has 31 members participating, plus Sweden, which is in talks to join the alliance. More than 90,000 soldiers, sailors, and air personnel will take part, and more than 50 naval vessels and 80 aircraft are involved, as well as more than 1,000 combat vehicles. It's a significant step up from the last Steadfast Defender exercises in 2021. Those involved about 10% of the personnel taking part this time around. NATO says that's due to changing realities on the ground in Europe, especially following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the ongoing war there.
The security situation in Europe has dramatically changed over the last couple of years. We have to exercise at a larger scale and with more complexity than we were used to doing in the era when we were mostly focused on overseas operations. So I think what you're seeing this year in 2024 is the new normal.
That new normal does not please Russia, which sees NATO as a hostile alliance. Russia considers major NATO exercises as a threat to its security. In our understanding, the alliance was conceived, formed, configured, and managed by the United States as an instrument of confrontation. Steadfast Defender will shift from naval readiness in southern Europe to ground-based exercises in the alliance's northern and eastern flanks over the coming months. It's set to wrap up at the end of May.
For more context on this, I'm joined by Ian Bond. He's Deputy Director at the Centre for European Reform, and he's joining us from Surrey in the UK today. Good morning, Ian. The biggest NATO exercise in decades. Is NATO basically wargaming a conflict with Russia?
Yes. I mean, after the invasion of Ukraine, NATO has had to step up its own defense preparations because suddenly we see a major war unleashed on the continent of Europe for the first time in a very long time.
But Russian leader Vladimir Putin indicated in a recent interview he doesn't want to attack any NATO members. Is that not reassuring for NATO?
Well, he also said exactly the same thing shortly before he invaded Ukraine. So I think the answer to that is no, it's not very reassuring at all. There's a famous internet meme that says, don't believe anything until the Kremlin has denied it. So, this is, I think, a good example of why NATO has to be prepared for anything.
US presidential hopeful Donald Trump has once again brought up the issue of some NATO members not contributing at least 2% of their GDP. If he were to be re-elected, what is the impact that would have on the NATO alliance?
It would be extremely destabilizing. I mean, I saw that you had the clip of Trump making these extraordinary comments about, encouraging Putin to attack NATO member states if they weren't spending 2% of their GDP on defense. And NATO relies on the credibility of the guarantees that members give to each other. And if the United States, the largest NATO member, is basically saying, well, we don't care if Putin attacks some of the member states, that is extremely destabilizing and likely to lead to miscalculations and the risk of conflict launched by Russia against the most vulnerable states, for example, the Baltic states.
Staying on that question of Donald Trump becoming potentially US president, if he were to become US president and US involvement in NATO were to be reduced in some form, would the rest of the NATO members in Europe be prepared to cover up for that deficiency?
As things stand at the moment, they would be woefully underprepared. There are still more than half of the European NATO members who are not spending 2% of their GDP on defence. Some are spending well above that. I mean, Poland will spend about 4% this year. But I think NATO countries have to start thinking much more seriously about how they would cope if the US were unable or unwilling to make the contribution that had previously been planned.
Are you saying that thinking is not happening in Europe?
If it's happening, it's definitely happening well behind closed doors. And perhaps that's, that's sensible. But we don't really see the defense production being ramped up in many NATO countries in the way that you would hope if they were actually starting to take their defense much more seriously. The fact that European countries have really struggled to get even to half of the amount of ammunition that they said they were going to supply to Ukraine by this spring suggests to me that they're still not investing enough in increasing defense production.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but thanks so much for joining us this morning. Ian Bond with the Centre for European Reform. Thank you so much.
Thank you.